Well, welcome everybody to the music mixing crash course. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and I want to welcome you to, I think, something that you'll find very interesting and helpful and useful. At the end of this program here, we're going to have a Q&A. So on the right-hand side, on the chat, at any time, you can put your question in there, and I'll be happy to answer whatever question that you might have. So that's anything that you might have. So you're here because you want to learn the tricks behind getting a polished radio sound. It's something that everybody wants. When you're first starting, it seems like it's kind of out of reach, but there are some tricks to actually getting there, and hopefully I can show you those, or at least some of them today. Can't show you everything, but I can get you started in the right direction. If you stay with me till the end, I have a thank you gift, and it's a little ebook, Mastering Your Songs in 6 Steps. Everybody needs to do that. You want to master your songs so they're as loud as everybody else's that you hear. And also, you really would rather go to a mastering engineer, but sometimes you can't do that. So that means you're left to your own devices for mastering your songs. Again, I'm Bobby Owsinski. I'm a mixer and a producer and an author, and maybe you've read some of my books here. I've written 23 on music, recording, the music business, and some other things. Being a touring musician, a real good one with Ken Scott, Abbey Road to Ziggy Stardust. So a lot of different things, and I hope you've read some of them. I also write a couple of blogs every day. There's my Big Picture music blog, music production blog. There's my Music 3.0 music industry blog, and a podcast as well, my Inner Circle podcast. And the Inner Circle podcast, in fact, has some movers and shakers in the music industry, and that's once a week, every Tuesday, that comes out. So if you haven't checked any of those out, please do. I think you might like them. When I first started in the music business, I mixed everything, including commercials and good movies and bad movies. Good movie on the right, bad movie in the center. I also did a lot of mixing, a lot of surround sound mixing, actually 5-1 mixing for a lot of these artists here, for all of these artists, plus a lot more actually. And that was a lot of fun. It's great fun to work with your heroes. So that's kind of one of the best things about doing that. I've also, in the last few years, had a couple of minor hits. One that I mixed that was number 2 on the Billboard Blues charts, Double Crossing Blues by Adriana Marie and her Groove Cutters. And another one, number 6, it was number 6 on the iTunes rock charts for the rock band Snoo. That being said, you're here because you want mixes like you hear on the radio, and hopefully I can help you get there. So there's actually 6 mix elements, but the most important 4 we're going to touch on today: balance, EQ, compression, and effects. The very first element is balances. So I'm going to show you a secret here to get great balances. One of the problems that we all have is that our balances may sound great when we're mixing, and we take them to our car, we take them to a boombox, we listen on a phone, for instance, and it just doesn't sound the same. And either the low end is gone or it's too loud. So I'm going to show you a secret that a lot of great mixers use in order to make sure that their mixes translate. Most mixers will use 3 different levels when they mix, and these levels always stay the same. The reason why is if you start to vary your levels all over the place, then it's hard to get a good reference point. And also, sometimes your speakers sound different at different levels. So if you lock in these 3 levels, then you find that you get used to them and you know how they sound. So for instance, there'll be 3 levels. There'll be one that will be fairly loud, And that's just for getting the low end together. And then there's one that's moderate, not too loud, and that's for most of the mix. And then there's one that's very quiet. So at the end of the mix, you go to the very quiet one, and then you can pretty much hear how your balances really are. It's surprising at a low level. Things will jump out at you or not jump out, and you can really tweak things very well. So what do I mean by 3 levels? Okay, I'm going to use the master fader here. Now, I normally wouldn't do that. I'd use my control room level control, but in this case, I'm going to use the master fader just so you can hear the difference. So this would be my mid-range moderate level that I would work at most of the time. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. Okay, so now if I really want to focus in on the low end, then I'm going to turn this level up. And you have to move a little bit of air. Not for a long period of time. It might only be for 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the most. You're not going to play it very loud all day, for instance. It's just going to be until you figure out what the low end is. And it's very difficult to do that unless you move some air. So now have a listen. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased. So now you can hear that we can zero in on our low end and pretty much hear what things are like, and we can tweak them as needed. Now, the third level is very quiet. And what do I mean by very quiet? I mean just about a whisper or a little above. So much so that if someone comes in the room and begins to speak with you, they're going to drown the level out. So it's very, very quiet. So it's something like this. Now, it might even be quieter than that. I'm wearing headphones, so there's no feedback here, and it's very difficult to kind of gauge this stuff with headphones. But what I'd be doing in this case is I'd be listening, first of all, at the very, very low level on my normal speakers and getting the level there, and then I'd be transferring to a very bad, crappy pair of speakers, a $10 pair of speakers, the worst speakers that I can find, and I'd be listening on that as well. And if you do these and go back and forth between the 3 levels, even towards the end of the mix, you still might want to go to that high level again, that loud level. Just check your low end one more time and then bring it all the way down. But you'll find that when you do this and just keep those 3 levels, that all of a sudden your mix is going to balance out better. And by not really varying the levels all the time, and a lot of people do that. They'll turn it up at random and they'll turn it down at random and then they'll put it to another spot to do their mixing at random, and they're always moving the level control. And that's very confusing to your ear, and it really is something that is going to be bad for your balances. So 3 levels, and you'll find that that's going to work much, much better than just. So, of course, that was on Pro Tools, and it will work. The technique will work on any digital audio workstation and audio workstation. So the secret to great balance is just a summary here. The first thing we're going to do is determine 3 mixing levels. You want a medium one, and that's the one you're going to work at most of the time. You want a loud one, and the loud one is for setting bass and drums. And frankly, that's one that I didn't use for a long time. I always wondered why my mixes were kind of off on the low end. It was because I wasn't listening loud enough. So you don't have to do it for long, but you do have to do it. And then finally, you want a really quiet level for your final balances, and you'd be shocked at how well this works. You put it down just as low as it will go, and things will jump out, or you'll lose things. So there'll be elements in the mix that you know are important you won't be able to hear. So that means, well, I have to boost them up a little bit, or vice versa. There's something that's really jumping out. So this really works well. And I have to say, if I were to put a figure on it, I would say, 80, 90% of mixers use this trick. I'm talking about A-level mixers. So it's something that's used quite often. Okay, next thing. Secret to EQ. Yes, there is a secret. And I'm going to show it to you here. It's something that I think all of us, we know how to use it and we don't do it enough. So let me show you this because I think you'll find it quite useful and something that you can use like right away. When it comes to EQing, people that haven't mixed a lot tend to do the same things that really fall into a trap. And the first thing is to always EQ in the same places. So in other words, you'd have several tracks that would have the EQ boosted at exactly the same place. And as a result, what ends up happening is that they clash. So let me play this track for you. Concentrate on the guitars because they sound pretty much the same, and then we'll solo them up and have a listen.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words is a mess on my mind. It's like a never.
Okay, now let's solo these up. And that's another problem. A lot of times engineers that, again, haven't mixed for a long time, they'll tend to solo the instrument and just do all the EQing. And they'll solo each track and go along, EQ it, make it sound good. But the problem is they have to fit together. So sometimes something that sounds really great by itself sounds really crappy when it's in the mix. And it may not fit in the mix. So that's why when you're EQing, it's best to always listen to another instrument. And I'm going to show you how to do that. First of all, let's listen to these two guitars. Now, I didn't track this, so I'm not sure if it's two different guitar players or if the same player. Kind of sounds like the same player. And again, even if it's two players, what tends to happen sometimes is they may be using the same guitar and the same kind of amplifier and have basically the same kind of tone. So right off, you're going to have a lot of butting of frequencies. And that's one of the reasons why you find guitar players, studio players, have a lot of different instruments and a lot of different amplifiers, is because they'll mix and match the sound in order so they don't have those frequencies. But in this case, we have two similar sounding guitars, so we're going to try to fix that. So let's listen one more time. Okay, so I'm just going to add regular Pro Tools EQ, nothing fancy here, and we're going to start on the right guitar. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to brighten this one up. And I might not always do it this way, but just as an example of how this is done, I'm going to brighten it up somewhere 3-4K. Now, again, the big problem would be is if on the left one, I also EQ at the same frequency. So watch. So here we go. We have the same problem where things are boosted at the same frequency. So no matter what, they're just going to sound the same. They're going to basically interfere with each other and mask each other in the mix. So the way to do this is if something is boosted at one frequency on the similar sounding instrument or the one that's masking it, you cut that frequency. Watch. Okay, so that sounds better already. And what I would do is I would boost at another frequency instead. And I may add a little bit of another frequency around it. Now, you can see they both sound different now. They don't clash with one another. And even though I really attenuated one frequency on the left-hand guitar, it really doesn't sound that bad because I'm boosting at other frequencies. This is pretty much the way you would do it in a mix, but you would go one track to another and keep on listening back and forth. And always make sure that if you're boosting at one frequency, you're not boosting on the next track at the same frequency. You just try to be a little different, or you cut. Don't be afraid to cut, because a lot of times cut might work better. Now let's just listen in the track here for a second.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words was a mess on my mind. It's like a never, oh never.
Okay, so I'd take this one step further and I'd EQ both guitars against the vocals, so the vocals don't cover them up and they don't cover the vocal up. And I'd probably go and listen to some of the other instruments as well, just to make sure that, in fact, nothing is masking anything else. Now, there's another way to approach this. So what we're going to do is just cancel this out, and here's what we'll do. On the right-hand guitar, I'm just going to do a really big cut. So I'm going to cut a lot of the low end off. Let's EQ it up. Now I can do it like this, or I could do it with a filter. Let's just try the filter here. And I'll make it really steep, and I'll cut it off here. And on this one over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to boost a little at that frequency. So somewhere in the low end, I'm just going to boost it up. So I don't like this in this track as much, but this is another approach where what you might do is get rid of all the low frequencies on one guitar, one instrument, and boost them where you cut on the next track. And sometimes this works like magic, and it really makes things fit better into the mix. So again, we did this in, 5-10 minutes, but normally this might take several hours, maybe just on these two instruments, getting them to fit in the track. So this is why mixing can take really long, because you're constantly carving frequencies to make them work, to make the instruments work with all the other instruments, all the tracks work together so you can hear them all. And again, the EQ helps you do that. You don't need a lot of it. Sometimes just a dB or two is all you need to make things really fit together. So, the secret to EQ: you can't be afraid to cut. Cutting is very important. If you find the right frequencies to cut, things will suddenly sound better without having to do any boosting. Now, you want to boost still to help your definition in the track. So there's a combination there that you really need. But that being said, cutting is the key. If you learn how to do that, then you'll find everything else will come fairly easy. One of the things is don't boost your tracks at the same frequency. So if you have two guitar tracks, or a guitar and a snare, for instance, or a guitar and a vocal that are both boosted at 2.5K, chances are there's going to be a masking effect. One is going to mask the other. So in other words, you'll hear one and you won't quite hear the other. That's not what we want. We want to hear each one separately and definitively. So whole thing is just move the frequency a little bit. So if one is a 2.5, move the other one to 3K or 3.5K, and you'll find that will solve it many times. The other thing is if you have a frequency that's cut in one place, then that's a good place to boost on another track because there's a natural space for that particular frequency. So that's a really good way to do it as well. And finally, soloing is not a good thing when it comes to EQing. And I know several hit mixers, and the mixers I'm thinking about have had literally hundreds of gold and platinum records. And they will not solo a track and EQ it. They'll always be listening in the mix, or they'll be listening to several other tracks at the same time to hear what's happening, hear how they're interacting together. So you'll find this will work a lot better. Your EQ will work a lot better if you don't solo a track or you don't listen to it in solo. I know it's very difficult. It's a hard habit to break, but usually when you make things sound great in solo, they don't fit in the track. And this is especially true of vocals. You can make your vocals sound terrific by themselves, and you put it in the track, and it's either too loud or too soft. It never actually fits. So this is a really good thing. You have to work on it, but it definitely will get you to the next level. So the next thing is compression. Okay, a lot of people have trouble with compression. And one of the reasons why is there's a lot of parameters to compression, and we don't use them all. And the real key sometimes is setting the attack and release. That's what makes things really feel good. And there's some other things too, setting the ratio. And like I say, many times we just tend to use the default settings. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. And then we kind of just fool around and see if we can make it sound better without really thinking about why we're doing it. So hopefully this can help you solve that problem. Sometimes one of the hardest things is to understand compression and how to set it up. And you'll find that many musicians, especially who are trying to mix, will basically use the default setting all the time. Now, you can actually get some good results that way more times than not, but pros actually approach it a different way, and they use the parameter controls that are available to them actually to make things work a little better in the mix. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the compressors on kick and snare, and I'll do one in the vocal as well, so you can just see how that kind of works sometimes. So we have these two kick drums here. We have one that's in and one that's out, and they're subgrouped to this track right here. And let's listen a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to use just a B-flat Pro Tools compressor, nothing special. They'll all be set up exactly the same way. And here's what we'll do. Now, the first thing is, if you want a lot of punch, use a low ratio. If you want a lot of control, use a high ratio. So that's the difference here. Punch on a low ratio is what we want. It may be pretty low. It may be 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, something like that. So that's where we're going to start. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to take the attack, turn it all the way up as slow as it will go, and the release all the way to the left. So basically what we want is a very slow attack and a fast release. We're going to start there and then watch what's going to happen. I'm going to increase the threshold. Now there's actually some motion that's happening there on some of the peaks. And now the first thing we're going to do is back the attack off. Now watch. Now, first thing that happens is if we back it off too much, it's going to take the transient out of the attack. So now we're going to lose the punch out of it. So where is it right? Well, just about the time you begin to hear the sound get dull, that's when the attack is set correctly. So we'll hear it get dull and we'll back off a little bit. You can hear how bad it sounds there. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start to increase the release, and as we do that, we're going to get more and more compression, so we'll have to back off the threshold as well. Now, what am I trying to get here? I'm trying to make the sound longer, especially on the drums. So instead of just going bap, I'm trying to make it go bap. So the sound is longer, and you're doing that with the release. And ideally, what you're trying to do is make it long enough so it stays until the next hit. You can't always do that, but you want it to sort of breathe with the song, breathe with the tempo of the song, with the pulse of the song. Now, you don't need a lot of compression to make this work. Now we'll bypass it. And what we're going to do is we're going to listen at pretty much the same level. If you add enough compression, or if you do this the right way, you'll find that your level is going to go down when the compressor is in the circuit, in the signal path. When you bypass it, it's going to get louder. So that's why we use the gain control to boost it up. So if you bypass it, or if you have the compressor in the signal path, it's the same level. And you can hear that get pretty punchy. So let's listen to the track. And you can hear it when I bypassed it, it kind of got lost in the mix. Now, obviously, we'd use a different compressor than this. There are several others that will work better and will just give you a better sound because they're made more for this type of program material. But just to show you that you can use just about any compressor and make it work if you know what to do. So now what we're going to do is go over on the snare drum. It's the same thing. We have two tracks, snare top, snare bottom here, and then a subgroup. So here we go. We're just going to use our normal B-flat Rotil's compressor. Have a listen. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put it on a low ratio, somewhere around there. Very, very fast release, slow attack, and now we're going to back the threshold off until we start to see some deflection on the gain reduction meter. Now we're going to increase the attack. And you can hear what happened. As soon as we got past a certain point, it really dulled, and it just sucked the life out of it. Now we're going to add the release. Hear how it smacked? It's too much compression, so we'll back off the threshold. Okay, so here it is without the compression and with. But listen in the track. Here we go. And you can hear the snare still when it's bypassed, but it just gets lost a little. It doesn't have the edge. So we're adding that little edge, and we're making it just jump out of the track a little bit more. And again, we'll do that in other places in the drum kit as well. And when we add them all together, you're going to have a really punchy drum kit. But if we use some other compressors that are better tuned to the drums, the sound will be a lot more dramatic. But this is basically the way you do it. You try to make the attack and release set in such a way that it pulses with the drums. Now let's go on the vocal for a second. Let's have a listen.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
Now this is pretty compressed already. When it was recorded, it was pretty well compressed. So the effect won't be quite the same, but we'll do the same thing. I'm going to put my normal B-flat compressor on. Actually, you know what? Let's just put the 1176 on so you can hear what happens. And the 1176 works backwards. So this is the fast release. This is the slow attack. Let's listen.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you.
Okay, hear what happened when we really made the attack fast. All of a sudden, we started to miss the beginning of his words.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased.
See, it sounds better. So what we're going to do is back that off.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more.
Okay, now let's just back off on the bypass, on the release a little bit.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
Let's listen in the track.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
And without it?
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
Sounds good, but just doesn't sound quite as good as with the compressor.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
And you can see I'm actually adding quite a bit of compression, and you'll find there are some times when you'll add a lot and it will sound great, and other times where you add a lot and it will sound terrible. So it depends on the program that you're using it on, depends on the track that you're using it on. But the whole idea is to set the attack and release controls so the compression breathes with the track, breathes with the pulse of the track. That's the whole key. So that's the secret to setting up your just about anything. The whole thing is the ratio control is more important than most people think. And the way it seems to me is most times that's the one control that's very much overlooked. And the setting is almost kind of random. Well, let's set it here. Okay, let's try it there. No, there's a good reason for setting it. And it depends on what you want. Do you want more punch or do you want more control? So a low ratio, and that's 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, somewhere in there, gives you much more punch, and a higher ratio gives you a lot more control. Higher ratio, I'm talking about 4 to 1, 8 to 1, and even more. The other thing is a moderate amount of compression usually works better than a lot of compression. And when I say moderate amount, it's 2 or 3 dB. You don't need a lot to make a big difference with compression. Now, yes, there are times when you really have to crush something, especially with the vocal, for instance. It's not uncommon to do 10 dB or 15 dB, and rare circumstances 20 dB of compression. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Usually it's better to use 2 different compressors rather than one that's cranked that much. But for the most part, you don't need much compression to really make it work well. And most of the time we don't want to hear it working, so the more compression we add, the more we hear it working. The attack and release controls are really important. And the whole idea of setting them is so they pump with the pulse of the song. So the compressor pumps with the pulse of the song. And if you do that across all of your compressors, what you're going to find is suddenly the track just feels better. It feels like it's the tempo feels better. Everything seems to work better about it. It's a real trick that I think you'll find goes back to the 60s even, when there weren't that many compressors that people had to use. But one of them, the big tricks was always to do it like this. And finally, when you're setting up the compressor, the best thing is to set the gain control so the level is the same when you bypass it. The reason for that is so you can hear the difference. Otherwise, it'll always sound louder if you increase the gain control, and naturally we always think something that's louder sounds better, but it might not necessarily be that way. So you can change the gain later, but when you're setting it up, make sure that the gain is kind of the same, so when you go back and forth between bypass and unbypassed and compressed, you'll get a good picture of actually what everything sounds like. So the last element that we're going to talk about today is the secret to using effects. One of the problems with effects, and especially with reverbs, for instance, is they don't fit in the track well. I had this problem a lot when I was first starting out, where I would add what I thought would be enough reverb, but it was either not enough or too much. It was never the right amount. Usually it would stick out of the track, and it just didn't sound right. So let me show you a way to fix that where effects are always going to work for you. It's common to put an effect up and put it on the track that you want and not have it work and not know what to do. But there's actually a trick that a lot of mixers use to make their effects blend in with the track better. And it's with little EQ. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to listen to the snare drum here, and I have it assigned to actually not a great sounding reverb. It's an air reverb. It's not tweaked at all. So basically this is just the settings that are defaulted. So there's no tweaking, and normally before I would do this, I would tweak the release or the decay time, and I would tweak the pre-delay time, but we're not even going to do that, just so I can show you how this works. So we have the snare soloed up. Have a listen. Now this sounds pretty crappy actually, and we can make it blend in with the track fairly easily. So we're just going to bring up a B flat EQ, and the fastest way to make this work, usually the thing with reverbs especially, is the low end gets in the way. So if you get rid of the low end on a reverb, it will still sound really good, it just won't take up as much space. So have a listen. Let's solo this up so you can hear what's happening. Now I can do this with the high pass filter, or I can just do it with the low end EQ, but now you hear what happens. heard, it cleaned it up quite a bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing only with the high end. So now I'm going to take the high end, and here's what we'll do. We'll solo it up again. When you listen in with the rest of the track, with the vocals and everything, now that crappy sounding reverb actually sounds pretty good, and it fits in with the track really well, and it just adds some glue. Have a listen again with the vocal in.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on me.
So when I bring it down in the mix, bring the reverb down in the mix, now it sounds pretty good. Now listen when it's bypassed.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees.
So just that little bit of EQ, well, it's actually a lot of EQ on the high and low end. And I use a high and low pass filter usually to do this. But you can be very severe about it and make it sound pretty good. And again, what I do first, though, is I would tweak the reverb, the pre-delay, and I'd tweak the decay first to make it breathe with the track, and then I would do this. But it just gives you the idea of how this works and how well it works. Now, let's do it on the vocal, and we'll also do it with the delay, so you can hear how it works there. So first of all, here's what we have.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
Okay, that's fairly obnoxious. So let's have a listen.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
And once again, I'm listening on headphones. You may not be, so hopefully you're hearing this the same way I am. I might be hearing it a little more acute than you are. So actually what I'm going to do is goose this up a little bit so it's louder.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased.
So again, let's add our EQ.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
Already it sounds better when you get rid of the low end. I'm not quite as severe this time, but you get rid of the low end and suddenly it just seems to fit better. We'll do it with the high end as well.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
And have a listen without it.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
Now again, I would tweak the delay so it fits with the track better first, and then I would tweak the EQ and also the level. Now again, I'm exaggerating it here so you can hear it, but you can hear what happens. Now again, you don't have to be as severe as I was with this. I'm just showing you. I usually use a high and low pass filter here to do this, but you know, you can just back a little off and it makes a difference as well.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees.
What the idea is to make it fit in with the track without sticking out. We don't want it to be obnoxious. We don't even want to hear the effect many times. We just want the glue that it adds. And this is one way to do it. And again, we tweak the effects first, then we'd add a little bit of EQ or a lot of EQ. Either way, we do it until we get the sound we want. But this many times is the key, even on modulation as well, to really making your effect sound better and blend in with the track. Cool trick, huh? It really does work. EQ before the effect in the signal path. So yes, I know you can put it afterwards. It does still work, but it works better before. The reason why is you drive the effect differently. So if you put it after the effect, whatever it might be, especially reverbs, this is true of, it just sounds different. And it will sound better if you put it in the front. Attenuate the low end because you want to get rid of a lot of that low frequency stuff. That's what really muddies up the mix. And on a reverb, it only works if you only have a few things. If you're doing a piano vocal, for instance, yeah, keep that low end there on the reverb or on whatever effect. But generally speaking, if you have a lot of instruments going on, a lot of elements, mix elements, then you want to move that stuff out of the way. As far as the high end is concerned, sometimes an effect is just too bright and it sticks out of the mix. And what we wanted to do is blend in a little bit. So all we have to do is attenuate the high end a little bit. So again, on the low end, it could be anywhere from 100 cycles up to 500 cycles, 600 cycles even. On the high end, it could be anything 10K, 8K, 6K. I've even seen it down to 2K and it will work. So this is a real secret. It's something that you can use when you're doing your next mix. I see a lot of questions. I'm going to get to them in a second here. Actually, first, just allow me to do a commercial and I'll get to them all. This is just, let me tell you a little bit about my music mixing primer program. And the stuff that you've seen here, the tricks, the videos I've shown you, come from this particular program. And I like to think it's the mixing basics that really no one ever tells you. At least I've never seen a lot of these things. So I'm giving you the advantage of learning some of the things that I wish I knew when I was first starting. And I've learned them from some of the best mixers in the world since then. This is the tricks, the techniques that the best mixers in the world use. So if you're having trouble getting a mix to sound really good, I guarantee, I'm going to show you some quotes in a little bit, that this is really going to help you. Works on any genre, any DAW. There's 4 modules. You can access them at any time. A Q&A webinar once a month. And there's also a multi-track session that you can download to practice on. It's the same one I'll be using. And PDF checklists and guides and bonuses and things like that. I guarantee you your mixes will be better. And you know, better mixes mean a whole lot. You can get more gigs, you can get more sales, streams, views, any of those things. And best of all, you'll feel a lot better about what you're doing. You'll feel very confident in all of your mixing, and you'll feel better in your approach. And you'll learn to trust yourself as well. You learn to trust what you're hearing. And that's a problem that a lot of us have, where we're not sure, is this good or isn't it? And this will really help alleviate that. So here's module 1. It's all about prepping the mix, proper fader and plug-in levels, gain staging, really important for a clean mix, proper balance between bass and drums and between the vocals and the track, and a little trick to panning that's really important and really help your mix. It will help your mix stay pretty clean. Module number 2, using compression. You saw a little bit of it I just showed you here, but also the different types of compressors and how to use them. So in other words, what's the difference between an FET and an optical compressor? When do you use each? Or a Varimu and a VCA compressor? Well, there's a time and place to use each one, and it really makes a difference. The proper way to set one up, we just showed you that. Secret to punchy drums, compression on the vocals, mix bus compression. Everybody does this anymore, and it never used to be the case. Using EQ is module number 3, EQing the bass and drums, the vocals, and the little secret, the mixer's secret weapon, the high-pass filter. So all of those things, frequency juggling, so you can hear everything in the mix. And finally, using effects, timing delays and reverbs to the track. Some people know how to time delays, but reverbs are really important as well. And basic effects, there's also a setup that I'll show you that works on every single type of music in every mix. it's not to be used so much on your final mixes, or at least as a starting place you can use it, but on rough mixes, it's just makes everything so fast and easy. So if you think this sounds cool, I do have a special offer for you today. It's available for 90, usually it's 197 today, $97. You have to use MixWeb, the coupon code MixWeb. Go to mixingprimer.com, and this is the way you get the special deal. As it says, when your mixes sound good, just imagine what everybody thinks of you. They think that you're really good because you are. Yeah, it just makes you feel good that you know the tricks of the pros. These are some of the, just a few, I must have 100 of these, of people telling me how it helped them, how the music mixing primer helped them. And you can see just a few of these here. People are just saying they love it. They know how to do things that they didn't know before. There's one I like: more practical knowledge over the last 4 weeks of the music mixing primer than I have in the last 2 decades. This one I like too. It's transformed my mixes and freed me from recurring problems. Some actually said I was a magician after I mixed their stuff. My confidence is boosted, and there'll be lots of other things like that. A couple other ones as well. So now let's get to the Q&A. Now that you've seen the commercial, let's get to the Q&A. And I'm going to go back way to the beginning here. Greg Parker says the podcast rocks. Thank you. Always listens in the car. Vladimir says most important for home recording. Yes, when we showed you the EQ secret there, let's face it, a lot of us only have one guitar. We want to make sure when we add multiple guitars that you can hear them all, and that was a good trick in order to do that. Greg asked the CLA. Well, here's the thing with the CLA or any of those Waves plugins. They work a lot of the time. They don't work all the time. The reason why is there are certain parameters that are kind of fixed on them. So honestly, you can do this yourself. I mean, a lot of the things that you're getting from those is just a combination of all the things that I can be showing you here. Let's see. Solo says, thank you very much for the gems of knowledge. I'm glad you find them useful. And Vladimir, this is amazing. Greg Parker, interesting panning on the verb and delay returns. I don't remember exactly what that was, but I think they were panned to 3/4 rather than full left and right. And that's another trick. You'll find that most mixers have a narrow pan. So it's going 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock rather than full hard left and hard right. On effects, you might do that, but you won't do it on the rest of the mix because it just gets too wide. From Kundi, will delay phasing a chorus always come before reverb? Not necessarily, but usually. Again, it drives the reverb differently if you put it afterwards. I think you'll always find that if the reverb is last, you'll like the effect better. So yeah, if you're going to use any of that, that's the way I would do it. From Severer, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Which sources would you typically use a higher ratio on when compressing? Bass, for instance, you'd always use a higher compression because you don't want it to move. On a bass, you don't want it to be dynamic in the mix. Especially on a modern pop mix, you want it to sit there and never move. So you'd have a really high compression ratio, and not uncommon to go, 20-1. Really high. Another one would be on a vocal. Sometimes you might have to go 8-1. And the reason is the vocal is jumping around a lot. And usually in that case, you'll use 2 compressors. You'll use one that's set at, 2-1 or 3-1, and the other one at 8-1. And the 8-1 catches the peaks, and the 3-1 acts as a compressor. From Alex, missed the start. Will there be a replay? Yes, you will be getting a note in a couple hours, actually, with the replay link. You'll get an email. Kevin regards balancing. How useful is mono on one speaker? Very, very. It's something that I always use. I always listen in mono at least some of the time. One speaker works, but two speakers can work as well. It doesn't much matter. I know a lot of the real classic engineers, the guys that started in mono and then went to stereo. So these are guys in the 60s that were making hits back then. I especially know two of the five Beatle engineers who've, they recorded all the Beatles hits. And this is during a transition time between mono and stereo. And the reason why I bring that up is they would always tell me that the mono mixes is what they spent all their time on. And so they'd spend a day on a mono mix and then spend 30 minutes on the stereo. And the reason why is if you can make it sound really good in mono, then stereo is easy. Then it's just spreading it out. So that's kind of the way that works. You spend a lot of time, if you really make it sound good in mono, I guarantee it's going to sound great in stereo. Okay, another question here. I've heard about many using two-stage compression when tracking and mixing vocals, one with faster tack, one with the slower. How would you set that up? Well, yeah, I wouldn't do it during tracking, but mixing for sure. Tracking, you try to stay away from this stuff unless you're absolutely positively sure that you know what the sound is that you're going for. I mean, if you're absolutely just knocked over by the sound you're getting, then you track like that. Usually, though, you're not sure what the final thing is going to sound like. And the best example is if there's a whole bunch of overdubs going on that are going to go on the track, then you don't know what you're going to need in the end. So if you're doing a live to two track or something, then yeah, you do that. But otherwise, probably not. So how would you set that up? Well, usually one is set with the high ratio and it's set with the very fast attack time to catch the peaks. And a medium recovery or a release time. The second one would be the compressor, and that would be set to 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1 even, and it would have a rather slow attack time and a slow release time. So I hope that works. Sasha says, thanks. I'm thinking about following the full course. Good. I think you'll like it. From Greg, CLA reference regarding this solo EQ guys. Okay. I think I get you. Listening in solo, you're saying. Yeah, it's dangerous. From the standpoint that, again, you'll make it sound great in solo, and then when you put it in the mix, it won't fit. That's the big problem with all this. It just doesn't fit. Too loud or too soft, one or the other. And that's why, and that's another reason why you should get to the vocal as soon as you possibly can during a vocal. So during a mix. So in other words, I know a lot of mixers that will do the vocal first before they do the bass and drums. On the other hand, you can do the bass and drums, then the vocal, then add everything around it. So that's a way to make sure that you never lose the vocal or it never gets too loud. One of the interesting things is if you ever get to sit in on a mix with an A-list mixer and then you solo up the tracks, you'll find that in solo, a lot of them just sound like crap. They sound awful, but yet in the mix, it sounds perfect. So that goes to show you that if, something sounds bad in solo, but yet works in the track, well, there you go. That's why you don't want to mix in solo too much. Okay, so that looks like it. For those of you who stayed with me, I promised you a gift. So here's how you get it. So this is my ebook, Mixing Your Songs in 6 Steps. Go to mixingprimer.com, and that's where you get it. This is what it looks like. Go to Mixing Primer, and you'll see on the right, it'll say Webinar Bonus Book, Join Now. So click that, and then it'll lead you to the download page, and that's where you get it. Thanks so much for attending. Okay, Nate says, "Does it come?" Yes, the course comes with sample tracks. It's the same ones that I use to demonstrate on. So yeah, you get a really good R&B track that's part of it. Ego says, for guys EQing the same instruments, use a multi-analyzer. Yeah. Um, if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, if you can see what the frequency response is, sometimes that helps. I can't say always because it's still an ear thing and you can get fooled by it. Don't mix with your eyes if you can help it, but yeah, it really does help. Um, so finally, guys, again, it's a great deal on this. I'm sure you're really going to dig it. $97 today only. That's it. So you have to use the coupon code MixWeb to get the deal, though. MixWeb. So go to mixingprimer.com, and I hope to see you there. And I hope to see you on the next Q&A webinar for the Music Mixing Primer. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here today. I really enjoyed presenting this for you, and I hope you found it useful.